Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our little Van Isle 360 info session. We're going to try and cover a whole lot of ground real quickly and try and leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. Um, so, Jeff, do you want to just give us a couple little introductory words before we get rolling here?
Sure, Stuart. Thanks very much. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's having a great evening. Really appreciate North Sails taking the time to chat about this. Stuart, for sure, when they took Westerly around the island in 2015, saw all sorts of different conditions, as we can see on the first one here. So I know nothing about sails, making sails, or anything like that, but Lord knows I get asked questions all the time. So it's wonderful to have Alex and Stuart here to be experts and hopefully provide a lot of information we can all use and answer any questions that are out there. So thanks again, North Sails, for making this possible.
Thanks, Jeff. Alex, do you want to get us rolling on the?
Yeah, let's get it rolling. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm from North Sails Vancouver, here co-hosting with Stuart Dahlgren from North Sails Victoria. And I just want to start our presentation with saying thank you to Jeff and Celia for taking us for another lap around Van Isle. As we heard the rumors in 2022, there was a potential for lost race, but here we are 2 years later, gearing up for another incredible adventure. A huge thank you to all the organizers, volunteers, and behind scenes teams who make it happen for us. I had a chance to participate in this race in 2017, 19, 20, 22, and I can honestly say this is unlike anything else from geographical perspective, and its unique challenges. It's absolutely stunning. The race schedule is intense and demands a lot from crews and teams, so everyone's supposed to be engaged all the time on and off the water. And I guess the key part of the race is the preparation. It's everything. It's not just about fast starts and good tactics. It's all about manage your logistics, manage your crew lineup, delivery teams, etc. And this is true test of coordination and teamwork. For you who've done race before, you know what I'm talking about. For the newcomers, you guys about to experience, you're probably one of the craziest experiences in your life, and I hope you will enjoy it. Maybe Stuart, you can add something more to this.
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Alex. It's a logistically challenging race. I would say, having done 4 races to Hawaii on myself and 2 races to two laps around Van Isle that I was kind of running the campaign, I would say the Van Isle race has almost stood out as, more logistically challenging in a lot of ways. I mean, I think the only benefit that Van Isle has from logistics is you finish where you started. So, at least you don't have some other challenges regarding that. But yeah, no, I think it's a really special race. I think it's really beautiful, and is a really neat opportunity and to race in a bunch of different places and formats and visit communities you wouldn't might otherwise do. So yeah, I think it's really special in that regard, and I'm glad that we still have it in our local racing community. I'll just flip to the next slide, Alex. So the race overview, it's 9 legs, 6 that we would consider the inside or 6 that we consider the inside and 3 that we consider outside legs. You can consider, basically all weather conditions and wind conditions. That being said, the typical summer pattern, at least of yesteryear, is a kind of Pacific high pressure setup, which means, moderate to strong northwesterly flow over the region, which is typically, amplified north of Campbell River through Johnstone Strait and some of the narrow passes up there. And then again on the west coast with various geographic influence from areas like Brooks Peninsula, et cetera, that have, surprising impact on our wind or prevailing wind conditions. It's one of the rare races in the Pacific Northwest where we actually get to sail in real waves, specifically downwind. I would say that the offshore legs in the 2015 race were the key primer that sparked us on our desire to go and do the 2016 Van Isle, or Vic Maui, I should say, because we just had such a good run down the West Coast. And we thought that, the whole way to Hawaii was going to be those beautiful days of sailing, which it turned out to very much be quite a bit different a lot of the time, but that's a story for another day. I would say one thing that's pretty predominant that we're going to talk about a couple times in this is that because of the strong geographic influence of Vancouver Island and the local area on the wind pattern, it is a predominantly upwind downwind race. I canvassed a bunch of, this was my personal feeling, and I reached out to a number of friends and sailors and colleagues who had done the race previously. And, I asked them, like, how much reaching did we do? Like, I don't remember doing any reaching. And, most of them responded, yeah, 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there, but pretty limited. So I think that's going to be an overarching theme that's going to come back into our conversations. I would think the other thing that I would say is that while all weather and wind conditions are possible, when I think about the race, I think about it as being dominated by
Look here.
light, moderate to heavier upwind conditions, which are predominantly the upwind conditions, generally speaking, unless we get a big southeasterly pattern, which has happened a couple times in the last few years. On the offshore legs, the upwind is typically dominated by flatter water type sailing, and the downwind sailing on the outside, again, in the typical pattern, is typically dominated by more of an offshore in swell and ocean kind of wave condition. So I think that's an important thing to also think about when we're preparing, optimizing, and building our sail selection and kind of boat setup guides. So on those lines, want to just roll advances again, Alex?
We can slide an ORC here.
Yeah, so ORC, it's kind of nice that the race is now being sailed completely under ORC. I sailed a couple of versions that were a mix of PHRF, IRC, and I think I did the one race where we had three scoring systems, where we had a PHRF, a IRC, and a ORC courtesy scoring. ORC has definitely proven to be a leader in our area that has made a VPP-based measurement rule accessible to a more club level style racer, and I think it works as best as any rule that I've seen yet to date to attempt to rate boats fairly and not as an effort to type form and drive a certain direction in yacht design. So a few things I think that are good to just maybe know or take away when you're thinking about optimizing. I don't think ORC optimization is actually really well understood, and I actually think because of ORC's ability to correctly take a whole bunch of various inputs, it's actually a very hard rule to optimize under. It's not as clear cut as a lot of other rules where it's simply that the formula is make the boat heavier, reduce the head sail size, increase the spinnaker size. ORC is not as clear cut and as clean as that. What I can tell you is the rule is extremely stability sensitive. And it does really change your rating when you change things that affect your stability. So the big reason that comes into the international versus club rating discussion is that one of the key components that happens when you get an international versus a club rating is you weigh the mast. And if you have a club rating and you go and look at your or ask your ORC measurer for what the input is for the default mast weight, it'll typically be quite a bit lighter than what your mast actually is. And so that has a significant effect on the riding moment calculations of the boat. I think the other thing that factors into that is a lot of people are going to sail this race with a smaller crew than they would do for around the buoys. And the default crew weights for your ORC certificates, especially for bigger boats, are quite high. So not suggesting that everybody goes Melvis 24 style and cuts weight and gets on a scale, but it's definitely worthwhile to actually take a reasonable look at your crew makeup and if not everyone's too shy, get and ask that question round table and update your certificate, because you'll be probably pleasantly surprised what that does for your rating. The other things that you can do is that, because sail measurements are not binary like they are in PHRF, you have the ability to remeasure sails that are even a couple years old. And typically, most sails, while we think of sails as stretching, and the camber and the depth of them changes, the actual edge dimensions and mid-girths are often actually shrinking, especially if the sails have high Dyneema content. So remeasuring small amounts of girth changes, etc., can be worthwhile to adjust the rating, because the rating is not done in, like many of us are used to in PHRF, where there are large increments or steps that represent 3 seconds. You know, every millimeter essentially goes into the calculation of the overall rating. So it's, worthwhile to do if you have sails, especially if your biggest sails, so your largest head sail, your mainsail, etc., are a couple years old, worth to remeasure them. Code sails. So ORC is very good to understand, is an outlier in how it rates code sails. And so that means that traditionally we think of code zeros, or any sort of head sail set flying or tweener type sails, it's called in different rules, as a sail that is larger than 75, or smaller than 75% mid girth is rated as a head sail, and larger than 75% as a spinnaker. In ORC, that number is actually 85%. So if you have PHRF IRC style code 0, that sail needs to actually be measured as a head sail set flying and declared in your ORC rating. And it does have a fairly significant impact on the rating. So it's worth potentially looking at a trial certificate. And as we discussed, as I alluded to earlier, my feeling is there's not a lot of reaching in the race. And on a large percentage of boats, it's not a worthwhile thing to carry. What is being done in a lot of areas, is a lot where ORC racing has become quite competitive, is boats are really going down the road of building 85% girth A3, A5 type Spinnaker sails, which are, not quite as good for those closer angles, but they can actually be a little bit more versatile, and they're not a penalty under ORC. I would say, and then the last thing is the Polar's performance package. I don't know how many of you have actually been on the ORC website when you're looking at your certificate or renewing, etc., but worthwhile to go in there. That Polar performance package is relatively inexpensive, and if you don't have something else, is a really good starting point for building a set of polars, and some empirical performance data for your boat. I will say it's not. I've gone through the process of using the ORC international polars, and then I've used refined polars from professional navigators and naval architects, which have been co-developed. And my experience of the ORC polars typically want you to sail your boat a little bit higher and slower upwind, and a little bit lower and slower downwind, than a lot of boats and designs actually want to be sailed. So take that with a grain of salt. They're a very interesting thing to explore, because they are, theoretically how fast your boat is going to sail to the rating. So, if everyone was sailing at 100% ORC polar all the way around the race course, the rating would be working 100%, which is probably, a big ask, but, that's the theory, right? Yeah. Does anybody, take a couple questions as we go, just to make sure you're all alive out there. Does anybody have any specific questions around ORC? Anything we discussed there?
Well, one thing I could add probably is that I would really encourage getting international certificate versus club. And as a pretty simple example, as you know, we also have a one design rating in ORC, and I know the story when the guys had two Malgus 32s in the club. They were racing on every Wednesday night, and one boat ended up getting international search versus club one. And it was a pretty significant gain over 40 seconds or 35, 40 seconds. So the system is definitely worse in terms of favoring stability, weight, uh, related aspects of the system. So if you are in a hunt for podium and you want to get the best out of your cert, get an international one, spend some time, but it definitely will come with a huge reward.
Yeah, for sure. I've been on the losing end of that too, which is why I drive the issue home. It's worth the time and energy if you're doing this race often. Sales and sales selection. So understanding what you have, what you need, what works for you. So understanding what you have, obviously that starts with a discussion with a sailmaker or your navigator and your team to kind of try to understand what exactly you have in your inventory, what the holes are, and kind of what your risks are as far as like what's your oldest sail, what condition do you feel that are not well prepared for, or you've struggled to mode the boat in. What you need is a little bit, we'll get into that right away, which is basically the sails you're required to carry for the SERs and the NOR. And then a little bit of what works for you as far as different configurations, modes work for different sailing styles. A couple of people I know are going to sail the race double-handed. So even on the same boat, their setup might be different than someone who's sailing fully crewed. I would say like key points that from my mind is a simple inventory is a good inventory. I know everyone thinks that us as sailmakers want to sell you as many sails as humanly possible. But I think we generally firmly believe in that, less is more, because whenever you have many sails, you always have the wrong one up. Having a whole bunch of sails that are really good and really targeted in very small wind ranges just means lots of sail changes, and not necessarily better results. So I think really understanding how your boat goes through the range and how to get the most out of each sail, and working with someone you trust to help you design sails that work for how your boat sails and the way you and where you're going to sail, to minimize those holes in your inventory, but also to minimize the number of sails you need to carry to effectively get off the race course is a good thing to do, right? I think it's really important when you're preparing and trying to understand your inventory and how all the pieces fit together, is to go and try different configurations. Try reaching, even though we don't do a lot of reaching, and you might not carry a code sail, there's still lots you can do. Like, you often will find that you reef a lot sooner on a reach than you do upwind, because on a reach you're not trying to develop any drag, you're just trying to develop forward motion. So often reefing earlier when reaching than you do upwind can actually reduce the rudder load, and the boat's actually going to go faster and be more straight up and down, which can actually be pretty beneficial. I think another thing about when you're talking about the sail inventory and the selection is, like, we'll get into a little bit about how we name and refer to sails, so that when you're asking questions of your sailmaker, you can kind of have more informed questions. But I think it's also good as like a crew and on board your own boats, even, to just kind of have a good understanding of like what is on the boat, what we all call it, kind of all having the same name for it. And that can be pretty beneficial. Do you have anything to add to that, Alex?
No, I think you nailed down all the points, and it's definitely simple. Often it becomes a better solution overall, especially when you're planning to sail for 2 weeks around the island and you're looking to cover the very specific gaps on your polar chart. So make sure you bring the sails that are going to work well for you. And I think it would be pretty good topic to discuss is the sails that actually you have to carry on the boat, which is driving us straight into required sails under the OSR Cat 2.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah, so this is the category that the NOR currently lists. So theoretically, all three of these sails are required, with the exception that for the storm trysail, you can skip that if you have a reef in your mainsail that reduces the luff by 50% or more. So the heavy weather jib, I'll have you refer to the actual OSRs for the specific sizing requirements, etc. But the key points are, the heavy weather jib. Typically, this is the sail that you're still racing with when you're using. It's that entry, that first slide actually on the screen was going up Johnstone Strait in 35 knots with reefs and number fours, and us and Neptune's car in 25 and in 2015 had a battle all the way up Johnstone Strait in those conditions because we could get the boats settled in that big wind and still continue to race competitively, which was some of the most fun I've had sailing upwind in my whole life. So yeah, the heavy weather jib. I mean, I think important things is it's got to meet the OSR requirements for being its correct size. The key thing is it's got to have an alternate luff groove attachment. So that means basically if the sail is going into a foil, either a furler style foil or a Parkin or Schaefer style, plastic on the headstay foil, it's got to have some way of either hanking it or lashing it onto. And the OSRs do actually say that has to be somewhat permanently attached. So take with that what you will into that. A good heavy weather jib, like the old ones were basically just old cardboard Dacron high clued, triangles to put up. Modern number fours heavy weather jibs can actually be pretty versatile sails, and especially in the flat water that we typically experience, especially in the inside legs, can be pushed surprisingly far down range. In a modern J4, the trend is to maintain the aspect ratio a bit more. So typically they used to, shrink the foot quite a bit, as well as shrinking the luff, and the sail kind of pushed forward and up quite a bit in the four triangle. Modern number fours are actually typically aggressively shorter on the luff, like quite large luff reductions, while maintaining more foot length. And the reason for that is that it lowers the center of effort in the four triangle, and B, with a slightly longer foot, you typically have a bit better control over the cambers in the lower portions of the sail. So it's a lot easier sail to power up and power down if you're going through changing wind conditions, which often you are, and you're kind of on the edge of the number four and the number three. And so if it lets you, again, not have to make that change and be a little bit more prepared, that's good, right? One thing that does come along with these sails that are quite short is that they have a real tendency to pull out of plastic head foils. So that alternate luff groove attachment is a pretty real thing. And I think typically if you're going to use the thing in anger, my experience has come to be that it's better to just pull the number three down and then hoist the J4 as a bare-headed change, which allows you to have some sort of soft shackle, lashing, etc. At the very minimum at the head of the sail around the luff tape, which will greatly reduce the chance of peeling the thing out of the foil. Which is kind of the last thing you want to do. Our last Southern Straits a couple of years ago, we did that. There's a question in the chat regarding alternate left head. I have a couple of pictures I'll pan to in a second. Alex, actually, do you want to just pull up slide 9 for a second?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so slide 9, you can see these aren't great photos, but the one has a webbing loop, which is sewn in like a V configuration that basically a lashing can go around. And then the other one on the right hand there is just a grommet. What I have seen recently too, and I don't have a photo of it, is like a buckle style soft tank. So basically it's a webbing hank that has a side, like a heavy duty side release buckle, that can then go around the foil and buckle or to the other side. Those are pretty common in smaller one design boats that use kind of hanks instead of foils, but and they're surprisingly strong. And yeah, I would generally say that you would use that in addition to being in the left track, especially if you're just going to put the one on the head, which, ideally you're still using the left track and you're just putting one on at the head. But you have to have the capability of, attaching it all the way up and down the left to meet the OSR requirements. But, 9 times out of 10, if you have it well secured at the head, it's not going to peel out. It's not going to be an issue. Also, the age of the foil turns out is a pretty significant factor too. Old foils are more prone to having heavy weather and short hoist sails pull out of them. So that's something to consider too. Can you just go back to slide 6 for a second, Alex?
Just give me a second here.
And I know that one other thing, I know it's in the minority, but those of you which are using halyard locks that still want to be able to use them on the number 4, really strongly recommend you double, triple check those pennants at the head for that sizing and make sure that that kind of works and you have the effective range to do that, because it's a bad time to find out when it's actually number 4 conditions that you can't get the thing on the lock and kind of tensioned and settled properly. The storm jib, I think we're all a little bit more familiar with storm jibs and what they look like. They're quite small. Again, the OSRs kind of give you guidance on how to size it based on your 4 triangle. They also require the alternate left groove attachment up and down the luff. And typically they require some form of tack pennant or other kind of spacer to kind of get the thing to sheet correctly. Part of the challenge is when you shrink the sail, the foot of the sail so much, you're often have trouble even with a very high clew, which is ideal, getting it to sheet onto the tracks correctly. So it's really good to kind of make sure that all those kind of ancillary parts that go along with the storm jib, actually get you to a point where you can actually sheet the thing in properly and it's not just super full in the foot and super tight on the leech or vice versa. And storm jibs and or heavy weather jibs, now it's becoming more common with furlers on primary head stays to see those on alternate stays and other arrangements, right? Which if we just flip to the next slide for a second, Alex. Right, so you can see on the right hand side there, this sail is set up on a torsion cable with a 2 or 3 to 1 tack line that's run aft to a winch to tension it. And this allows the existing sail that's fixed on the furler to stay up there, the sail to be set inside of it without having the traditional, wire stay that has to come back to the mast and be secured and then hanged onto, right? This boat is also using, which is a good segue into storm trysails. So if you just flip back to a second for our last slide, Alex. So trysails, one of the challenges, especially for boats with furling masts, is there's not really a good way to rig them. I know lots of furling, everyone poo-poos furling masts, and they're not definitely the highest performance thing, but they are a reality, and all types of people want to go sailing. So so furling masts can be a real challenge. Carbon masts can also be a challenge because it's harder to add additional tracks or even put something in the existing track. So typically the accepted solution is with bolt rope sails. Bolt rope mainsail comes completely out of the track, and then the trysail is fed into the track and up on a bolt rope when it's time to use it. Typically, I would say that's, if you actually go out and try and set the thing up in a lot of conditions with a lot of boats, that's going to be a really challenging thing to undertake. And I would say that something that's definitely worth figuring out is how well your boat sails upwind without a without a trysail or any sort of mainsail at all. We have sailed. I've sailed in near 50 knots across the Molokai Channel in close reaching conditions with a storm jib only on the Santa Cruz 70, and it was happy to clam. There was no need for it. That boat goes great, nearly upwind, definitely upwind enough to get myself out of trouble or off a lee shore with nothing in the back corner of the boat. That being said, there are lots of boats with more traditional style keels that will not point and will not sail above a beam reach without something like a trysail, which is a big part of why they're so they're still such a big part of the rule, is that the more traditional boats really do need them to be able to sail themselves out of trouble. And then further to that, one of the big advantages of it is you know the trysail designed to be set independently of the boom. So that means that it's ideally sheets down to the back of the boat, and ideally the Spinnaker blocks or some other similar, heavy duty hard point. And with a broken or damaged boom, you can still use that sail. So that's the other occasion that these sails sometimes get used, is even when it might not be storm trysail conditions, but something has happened to the boom that's damaged beyond being able to be used with the mainsail. You can still set the trysail and create some level of balance and forward drive from that, right? I would say the other thing that you could do, or that I would recommend, and typically when I'm setting them both on the boat, is I build 2 tack pennants for the trysail. One that allows us to keep the trysail a little bit lower and actually sheet it to the end of the boom, and one that moves it up a bit higher and sheets down to the Spinnaker blocks. You have to kind of go into it planning to do that, but that means that you can have a bit more control of the sail and still use the boom main sheet, those controls, if you still have a boom when you're going to be using the thing. But you have to meet the rule, it has to be able to be used without the boom. So that's part of the requirement. And flipping back to that, yeah, just pause on that last one for a second, Alex. Yeah, so this is just an example here, because this boat here has a furling mast. An additional stay has basically been added that's removable, and you can see those little triangular things near the luff are actually soft tanks that allow that sail to be hanked onto a stay and hoisted without removing or dropping the furling mainsail. So that's one way to go about it. If you kind of have a challenging mast and think that this is an important thing to be able to viably put up in challenging conditions. Anything to add on that, Alex?
No, I think you nailed it all down, Stuart. Like, just making sure to practice with your storm sails normally when you're trying to put those up. The conditions are not very pretty, and it could be 30 knots, 40 knots, somewhere near the Brooks Peninsula, and pretty choppy. So it's better to practice on a calm day and understand where everything is going, where your jib leads are going to move, what lines you're going to use, and what procedure you have in place for the situation when you need those sails. So practice with storm sails, it's a huge aspect of being safe in those extreme conditions.
Yeah. And I mean, as we've seen recently, our weather patterns are changing, and there is a lot of energy in the weather, and geographic influence can make it pretty gnarly for short stretches on the west coast and the inside. But you got to get through those short stretches to keep going and get to the next leg. So you got to be able to get through those relatively unscathed.
Yeah, and I think we can probably, from storm sails, we can jump into aligning your sail inventory with your racing objectives. And you can see on this slide, you may have a boat with an overlapping rigging setup and a non-overlapping, which is going to be a pretty big factor in the way you organize the sail inventory around your boat. Overlapping rig plans, it's essentially, if your boat has overlapping rig plan, adding a head sail, set flying, which is those code sails, it may not be necessary. Instead, you could concentrate on building your downwind sails, like let's say add another kite in the inventory, or it could be A3, A5, whatever that is, and concentrate less on the code sails. For example, your most common inventory on the overlapping rig would look like a 155 Genoa number 2 and blade, and whatever selection of kites you have depending on your setup, whereas it's a asymmetric setup or symmetric kites. The idea here around organizing is not to carry 100 sails with you on the boat and play Tetris all the time inside. I just want to have a highly functional inventory. That means a pretty big range of the conditions. Your sales choices should cover broad range across all the wind ranges, and which will allow you to adjust easily depending on whereas you're racing upwind or downwind. Essentially, you want to be really have efficiency, and don't have too much of a quantity of the sales on the boat, if that makes sense. And it's would be quite different for non-overlapping rig plans. Let's say it's a J111 or XP44 with a quite wide shroud base, when you can't really carry a Genoa on the boat. In this case, head sail set flying, they come into play a bit more often. It could be those J0s or code 55s. The question around those head sails flying would be not just about how big or small you want to build the sails. It's about testing the sails, running test certs, and figure out what fits best to your boat and your needs. Running trials is definitely a big part in this process. The ORC trial run is about $10, so it's when you're investing in some expensive $15,000 sales, this test run can come a long way, maybe even a few of those. And also keep in mind your overall envelope of your rig and how everything sets up in relation to it. If let's say your midwidth of the sail is miscalculated, you might find out that it doesn't fill the fore triangle as well as you would hope it will work for you. And I guess another worthwhile to mention part is non-overlapping rig plans for light displacements boats like TP52s. I know we're going to have a few of those racing around the island, and those boats, they really have a huge amount of HSFs on it, including jib tops, stay sails, and sometimes you can even see the triple-headed setup out there. Let's say it was a jib top set of the bowsprit, J3 or J4 on the foil, and another stay sail there, just to make sure you can balance the power of the mainsail and keep the boat moving through the water. So assess your boat, figure out your rig setup, and what sails actually will worthwhile adding to your inventory and the sails that you're going to use. And I think with that, we can jump to the head sails. Do you want to take the slide, Stuart?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so head sails, it's a big topic, and it varies greatly from boat to boat, and it's hard to present it to a wide range of different boats and sailing styles. But I think if we just kind of try to key into core concepts and ideas, and how to build an inventory, and where to place value in your inventory, that's kind of the key, right? So as discussed, the heavy weather jib J4, I consider it part of a good inventory. And that sail being functional and actually being a sail that you're still competitive and still racing with is a key aspect to covering the top of the range. The next biggest sail, basically working backwards, there is typically what we call the J3 or blade in a lot of cases on an overlapping boat. this is a really great tool. It allows you to sail typically. You can get better sheeting angles with this sail versus the overlapping sails on boats that have overlapping sails. So getting into the sail sooner can pay big dividends. Typically sailing in flat water, you don't need as much power to get through, and so the more aerodynamic shape of a higher aspect sail can be beneficial. And as we kind of mentioned in the ORC section, that there's a solid chance that you're going to be a little bit under ideal crew weight, especially for some of the windier upwind stuff. So having a really good J3, I think, is like a you know core element of the inventory, and it can be pushed through a pretty wide range if the sail is fits the boat well and kind of nicely shaped. Um, and you can do things to power it up, like easing the backstay off, and sailing less halyard, all the typical things everybody knows how to do, can have pretty significant effects, right? And that's kind of these four photos on the screen. While this isn't a trimming seminar, do help illustrate some things. And so, on the right hand side, we've got typically this is actually a J3/J4 on this boat, so it's a heavy weather. It fits the heavy weather jib requirement for the SERs, and but it's still at the big end of that. And you can see two photos here, one with the backstay eased more at the top on the top photo, so you can see the headstay is not as straight, and especially if you look at the middle and top draft stripes, there's quite a bit more camber there. And then in the lower, the backstay's pulled on quite a bit, which straightens out the entry and flattens out the overall camber of the sail. So that's pretty important. That sail can go through a pretty wide range, and that's part of how we build these sails that go through wider ranges and can cover larger areas in the inventory, right? The J2 number 2 type sail in the inventory, I think in a lot of places in the world, it's the most used sail, or the most important sail, because it kind of covers, typically it's slotted into the medium wind range. I would think in Van Isle it's actually one of the least important sails, because in my experience, this race is very much feast or famine. There's a lot of like 0 to 8, um, and um, there's a lot of 0 to 8, and there's a lot of like over 20 in my experience, or 18 plus. And so kind of right in the sweet spot where the J2 normally fits in. And obviously if you have the space, have the resources, whatever, to have it, that's great. But I would say, I would be less worried about that sail than I would be the J3, J4, and J1, J15, which we'll discuss in a second. I think it's an important thing to think about too if you are in an overlapping boat. The number 2 type sail probably has the broadest and widest range of definition of what that sail is. Like in a non-overlapping boat, it's typically pretty much the same size as the J1 or the J15. But in a overlapping boat, that sail can kind of be anywhere from like a 115 to a 145. And that has a lot to do with whether the boat has swept spreaders, non-swept spreaders, how wide the sheeting base is. Some boats, it's actually better to reef the main once before you go down to the blade or a smaller head sail. So that plays into that decision making process, and there's a lot of minutia to get into. That's really boat specific, so I won't dig into it a ton. But I will say that typically in my experience, the smaller end of the range is better for older boats or boats with shallower or low aspect foils. That teams seem to benefit from sailing in a flatter, more upright mode, downwind or upwind, I should say. And IMSE fractional type boats tend to benefit from like bigger 140% type sails, because they seem to want to carry that sail well up into the range, and then and then reef once, and then put the blade up, which kind of turns the boat into a pseudo masthead. So just, it goes back to trying things out, experimenting, going through the ranges, seeing what works better. I think light air head sails is like a really important part. I think small gains in light air can turn into overall really large gains in this race. When you're jumping lily pad to lily pad, 100 meters can turn into a mile really quickly. And I would say that's actually less common in like medium or heavy air, where a big crew handling error obviously can cause a problem, or a real big slowdown. But typically in medium air, you're gonna, if you're a little bit slow, you're gonna bleed slowly, distance or miles, but it's not going to turn into a big you know deficit really quickly. Whereas in light air, not being able to get the boat moving accelerated, get to the next lily pad or connection in the breeze can be a big challenge, right? So I kind of, light air upwind sails, I kind of divide them into kind of three categories. You have your, what I would call your true J1 or light number one Genoa. Um, they're awesome sails, but anytime you build something that's kind of designed to be sheeted in kind of pseudo hard to go up truly upwind, that's built really lightly, it's going to be fragile, and it's going to have a short life expectancy no matter what you build it out of. And so I think that's typically not a great fit for most programs. When I used to build my own light number ones, I would go to my cloth supplier buddies and get cheap secondhand, second quality material, and build number ones together, and know that they weren't going to last us very long, but they were really good while they did. Unfortunately, that's not really a viable solution for most people or most situations. And so I've come to really believe that a sail that's a little bit heavier and a little bit more well-rounded is a good solution for most people, which kind of leads you to like the J15 or the light medium kind of Genoa. And so like this sail on the left in this slide is actually a J15. And in the top photo, the halyard is quite slack. And so that's, quite a lot of depth in the sail, and it really powers up. And then it's got our helix integrated luff. And so when you wind that halyard on, it really helps flatten the sail out, and lets it go through a wide range. And one of the things that we're typically recommending to our clients now is that we build the sail J2 strength, but with the J15 shape, which allows it to kind of be pushed through a wide range, and all the way to the bottom of the J3 range. And while you might have a small gap in what's truly optimal, my experience is because our breeze is either light kind of summer days, or windier system coming through, you're normally at either end of that range most of the time anyway, so you don't spend a ton of time there. And I think it's a worthwhile compromise to simplify the inventory and get another sail off the boat. It's not true for all boats. Some boats definitely like need a number two or a J2, but I would say the majority can get away without it, and definitely developments in sail design and technology are allowing us to do that better. So do you have further comment to add to that, Alex? Or
No, I think it's great. It's a perfect. Like I think I would add one thing on the sail changes. Just uh, since some sails they may have a different luff lengths and slightly different clue heights and shapes, it would be a great idea to mark your highlights to where your J1, J2, J3 goes. So once you're actually doing a sail change, it's way easier to get to your 100% setting right away. As Stuart said, like, yeah, one sail change can set you up where it's you going from 100 meters ahead, you can go back to mile and a half. So changes, they can cost a lot. Keep practicing those, and this is how you can make a lot of gains on those Van Isle day races.
yeah, and I think also understanding how your sails go through the range and where your crossovers are, helps you minimize having to make those sail changes too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we can jump here in the mainsails here. We got a nice picture here of a setup of the mainsail of different types with the race roach, square tops, standard roach, and in-mass furling mainsails. I guess the biggest idea, considering the mainsails, that this is your backbone of the boat. You're not gonna sail without it. Like, or if you sail without a mainsail, you're probably having a pretty long day on the water out there. um, Making sure that the sail is fully optimized, that you know that the batten pockets are fully set, and everything is dialed in, that your bolt ropes are set up, the clues are reinforced. And I guess the biggest point to touch base on the mainsails, the reef points. Some people sail with one reef, some people sail with two, and some people may sail even with three. Having that third reef at 50% of the luff length, sort of try to sneak that way around the OSR rules. Um, I would say this decision really depends on your boat and priorities and what in your given situation. Because some boats are just simply inconvenient to reef, and sorry, not to reef, to use a trysail. It can be, or it can be impossible for some guys. It can be just easier to put it a third reef in, and carry on with that. However, it also comes with downsides. You're carrying more weight in the sail, so it's somewhat handbrake on those light air days. And it's obviously a lot of factors where you can say yes and no for having a third reef or having dedicated trysail, but it's definitely decisions that you got to make up to you depending on your boat and priorities priorities there. Because practicing putting that trysail, like, it's actually not that easy as it seems, especially if you have a mast with the track slides, and you don't have a groove right above the stack height of the slides where you can just easily put a bolt rope in and raise the sail up. It can be quite challenging. um, so figure out the best setup that works for you, and make it work, and make sure there is no holes in the sail. This is the backbone of your boat. You're probably going to use this sail at every race of the Van Isle, and making sure that it's up to the game is quite important. And we got some pictures here of the riffing, as we talked about the riffing. Um, Make sure that you have a procedure for the riffings, that everyone knows what they're doing on the boat. Doesn't matter if you have a watch system, you don't have a watch system. Make sure that every crew member understands the procedure and sequence of the events when you're riffing. You always gotta lock must be attention before you tension the leech reefs. Otherwise, you can damage the sail. Make sure that leech lines they're being released first before the highlighter is released. And most common damage from the reefing is when it's slide area above the reef. You can also find different reefing techniques and setups. I would say that floater rings on a hook, they're probably most common. And the second one to follow up would be the snap shackle setup. It's quite important to understand your reef offsets and make sure that it's dialed in. Otherwise, luff tape being loaded in the wrong angles, and the sail is just simply not working very efficient. You can see that the luff tape here is pretty much parallel in column with the track, so it's on this picture here. And Mike, you got to make some marks on your highlights. Once you're ripping, you definitely in those high intensity situations when the sail is going down, and then you're putting back up, and even so it's super windy and you want to carry all the tension in the sail and keep it as flat as possible. You don't want to overcook it. So practice some briefing beforehand, mark your highlights, mark your reef lines, and make sure that you're following the procedure with the boom vang. Make sure that when you're reefing, the boom vang is loose, main sheet is loose when you're tensioning, because I've seen mistakes when people wouldn't ease off the vang or main sheet, they would wail on that leech reef, and it would just cause a lot of damage and deflection in the sail. Stuart, would you like to add anything else on the reefing?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say that I think that yeah, it is just the most like I fixed when I was, going around and helping customers and everything else, like definitely I've fixed a lot of mainsails in Van Isle as a result of poor reefing. So it's definitely something to spend some time on. It's worth doing. I think the other thing that's important to think about too is that even though sometimes it's not optimal, if you need to just get like 2 miles before you're going to turn the corner, um, a reef can actually be a quicker, faster alternative than a head sail change, right? So even if like, guys, we should really go from the, J3 to the J4 here, but we only got a little ways to go to the finish line, and like then we're going to crack off, and it would be actually nicer to have the bigger jib up then. The reef can be a really quick solution as long as it's well practiced, right? Um, so I think it's critical. I mean, mainsails, it's hard to really dig into a lot of minutia as far as how it should be laid out and how deep your use should be, and where your battens and stuff are going to be on the sail, because rigs are quite different from boat to boat, and the mainsail kind of has to be very fitted to the rig. All the sails do, but the mainsail specifically, right? I think the one thing that maybe we didn't really allude to is the rig bend and setup needs to be matched well to the mainsail, right? So that's something to consider as well, and potentially involve the rigger in that discussion with tuning the mast to match any new mainsails going on the boat. And I would say one other thing that was on the previous slide too that we didn't really talk about was looking out for pumping and rig inversion. This is definitely much more of an issue on older inline spreader boats, especially like masthead boats like the Cruise 50 and 70, and older CNCs, etc. A lot of them need a baby stay that's correctly tensioned to create or maintain curvature in the mast, and stop the mainsail head pulling on a mid panel section, and causing an inversion in the rig, right? So you can think that you're relieving pressure by reefing, but you're actually creating a load that's not well supported. So that's less common in modern boats now with swept spreaders, but definitely something to be aware of if you get an inline spreader boat, is how stable the mast is when you're going upwind, and especially banging around in waves with the reef end. There is always a solution to it, but you got to figure it out.
And I guess we're gonna jump in Spinnakers here. We divide the Spinnakers depending on depending on a symmetrical or asymmetrical boats. We divide those in two types: reachers and runners. And normally we refer to symmetrical kites with S and asymmetrical as A. And also we put a number next to it. The lower the number next to the code of the sail, the lower the intended wind range of use for the sail. And all the even numbers, such as 2, 4, and 6, whatever that is, it's kites meaning for running, and all the odd numbers, which is 1, 3, and 5, that the kite meaning for reaching. The only odd one in here is a 1.5. It's a light air VMG running kite. And tell you the truth, like the kites, they're quite different in the designs in and cuts. Let's say A1 or A2 for J120 can be very different compared to A2 on a TP52, since both sail quite different apparent wind angles. And as a sailmakers, we're trying to target the shape of the sail given to your boat, whereas it's a heavy displacement boat or super light planing hull. Um, and the kites, they obviously come in the different weights. The lighter intended wind range of sails, the lighter the class is, and it's progressively goes up. From we're stepped away from old days when we used to call the kites as a 0.5, 0.75, or 1.5, and now you most likely will find the class weight stated on the bag where your sail is stored. So as you can see on the polar charts, every sail covers its own range. In my opinion, in Pacific Northwest, having the light air kites is a must-have, as majority of the sailing we do is probably below 15 knots, and having those say A1, A15, and A2 is quite crucial, in my opinion. And also big specifically cut for your boat is also quite important. Stuart, would you like to add anything else here?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And it's like, it's interesting because when you look at these polar charts as a graphical representation, the like, some of the sails like the S4, A4 take up a large portion of that chart when you're looking at it visually. But as you say, we don't typically sail in those conditions that much. And so, weighing that as a buying decision and how we build the inventory is pretty critical. And the other thing to understand too is that these are pretty generic, right? I mean, there's a lot of boats where a lot of symmetrical displacement boats where you're just not going to have a kite up in 30 knots of breeze there, right? Whereas the S4 is showing that it's over and above 30 knots of breeze. Like, you'd be faster with a pulled out number 3 on a lot of those boats, right? So you have to take these are trying to help explain a complicated thing, but they have to be taken with a grain of salt. And like, definitely the real workhorses of the inventory, which we'll dig into a little bit later some more, like the A2 S2 sales, which while they it's funny when you look at this chart, don't actually represent a big area of the chart, or a very important sail for actually trying to sail downwind. And then something in the A1, A15, S1, S15 also is an important thing because we do a lot of light air sailing. And and the other thing that's important is if you're sailing with the tide, that can remove a parent as well too. So often those times, even though it's nice to have the tide helping you, you can be sailing downwind in 6 knots and you have a knot of tide with, now you've got only 5 knots of a parent to work with, right? So those light kites really help you keep moving and not just kind of be victim to the tide, as we all kind of experienced for a little bit at the beginning of around the county there the other day.
Yeah, no, totally, and nothing makes you make move quicker through the waters than a crispy new kite, especially the Pacific Northwest. And I guess we can jump into symmetrical kites here, where you can see different kites of the sail with the runners and reachers. They have a slightly different girths, less shoulder, less shoulder on the reaching kites, and slightly wider up top on the running kites. And as Stuart was mentioning, yeah, it's all about the apparent wind angle, and sometimes with crazy tides, it's your apparent wind angle may put you in a range where the true wind angle states that you can already jump on a next kite, but your apparent wind may be saying that you're still on a one. So you got to take it with a grain of salt and analyze the current situation on the water and try to make the best decision possible in terms of selection of the kite. and also asymmetric spinnakers, the same idea, different girths of the sail, so different designs. In relation to, especially with A2, A4 kind of sails, most of the sails, they don't change in size too much. They change it in terms of cloth weight quite a bit. However, you can notice a pretty big, substantial change in the sail area between A1 in relation to A15 or A2, and the girth relation. Um, and also obviously clue heights and on the different sails. I know that Stuart, you wanted to mention a few things on the slides. Maybe you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, asymmetrical kites and their design is something that I think is it's pretty near and dear to my heart, having sailed so many thousands of miles downwind to Hawaii in the last few years, and some of the things that we unlocked and figured out. And actually, interestingly enough, like Van Isle sent us down a path that didn't end up technically being the correct path for our boat when we first did it, and that the first one we did was very light air, and we really struggled. And so we just piled on sail area onto the boat and built really big, round, powerful spinnakers. And, and basically from there, we ended up walking back from that quite a bit and changing how we looked at it. Right. So, there's a lot of factors that go into asymmetrical design. I think one of the big challenges with asymmetricals today is that on a symmetrical or pole style boat, you have the ability to change the relative sheeting angle and kind of how the sail's set up on the boat quite a bit by just literally moving the tack around with the pole, right? You can make the relative luff longer by moving it up. You can make the relative luff shorter by moving it down. You can um, roll the sail around artificially by pulling the pole back, and so as we're seeing on a lot of boats now, for a whole bunch of reasons, it makes it a lot easier to sail the boat. You're either going to sail tacked on or near the bow or on bowsprits, and typically your sheeting point is pretty much fixed. So where that leads us to is basically requiring quite different sails for different conditions, right? And I think one thing that's really critical to understand is sea state is a really big factor um, in what's optimal for your boat, right? So, if it's a nice sunny day and relatively flat water, I've sailed with an A2 up into 28, knocking on the door of 30 knots of breeze. Try that at 3 in the morning offshore in big waves, and it's just going to be a recipe for disaster, right? And so, things that have big impacts are, the mid girth is a big thing because you can have a sail that has the same luff, leach, and foot dimensions, but the actual area of the sail changes pretty dramatically if you increase and decrease the mid girth, especially on, spinnakers are they're a much bigger, it's a much bigger factor change because it's a bigger sail when you change percentages of girths and etc, right? I think another thing that's really important to think about and understand is the clue height. The clue height, runner type sails typically have higher clues because essentially when you ease them out and you're trying to project them and roll them in front of the boat to sail lower at deeper angles, you want the head and the leech not to just twist off and be open, and you want to maintain, you don't basically be giving up that sail area on the top of the sail because it's just it's pointed off to leeward because the sail's opening up so much in the head. And so you know but the inverse of that is when you try and sail hotter angles or push up to get over something or another boat or get up onto a wave even. um when you sheet that sail in and sail a higher angle with that high clue and that wider head, you're now just creating a ton of drag and return into the back of the mainsail, and it's tipping the boat over a lot more than it's making it go forward, right? And so understanding that and how these various factors input into how the kite trims and behaves and what's the kind of correct solution for various conditions is pretty important. We found that we ended up using a lot more of these like kind of in between kites. Our favorite kite that we had on our boat was a 2.5, which was almost the same, almost exactly the same area and dimensions as our a 1.5, just quite a bit beat burlier. And the advantage of that sail is it had a slightly shorter luff, slightly longer leach, slightly more open head, and allowed you to drive around in waves offshore quite a bit more because, with that more open head, when you headed up to get onto the next wave, that would twist better and not just tip the boat over. And the other thing that happens at the inverse effect is when you get to the bottom of the trough and start to slow down, and if the boat starts to load up and the main trimmer eases the main out, what happens is the boom goes out. And with a really high clued sail, when the boom goes out, it often pushes down on the sheet, which closes the head back up and loads the boat back up. So while the main trimmer is trying to ease the main to get the boat back on its feet and go forward again onto the next wave, he's actually closing the leach of the kite and making the boat slow down. So, how all these things interrelate with each other is like really critical. And, it takes experience and practice and everything to get it right. But, you know, uh, yeah, it's a really interesting part of of what we do, and it could be a whole seminar all in of its own. But I think critical things to know is basically just it's worth measuring all your sales for ORC. Even if you're working with a different sailmaker than those sales came from, because your sailmaker, can infer a lot about what you have and how to maybe help your inventory in future decisions by looking at those numbers and relaying those luff, leach, length, girth measurements, etc. Right. And an easy thing for you guys to do when like look at your sales and pull them out of the bag is just pick the head up. And if the head angle is like this, it's probably a runner. If the head angle is like this, it's probably a reacher. And if you compare them, it starts to give you that's a really quick, easy visual reference to kind of compare your sales a bit, right? It doesn't tell you the whole story, but it gives you a lot of insight.
Good stuff. And here is a slide with the sales saying Stuart mentions that some sales can measure relatively the same in terms of luff, leach, and foot relation. However, the sail area can dramatically change depending on the girth of the sail, and it was quite popular, especially with large roach head sails, which are quite popular in Bermuda race and such. So this picture here gives you pretty good representation what we're referring to in terms of talking about the mid girth, the widest part of the midpoint of the sail, where with Genoa it's 50% for code sail, so it can be between 51 and 74, code 0 between 75 and 85, and so on with larger reaching kites and running kites. And we talked a lot about the sails today, the mains, jibs, head sails, set flying, and just kites overall. And in my opinion, everything when you're talking about the Van Isle and the preparation, it comes down to your sail chart. In my opinion, this is a great starting point. Whereas you are just building your inventory for your first Van Isle, or you already done Van Isle and you just potentially want to close some larger gaps. I use a sail chart as a shopping list. It shows you what you've got, what you're missing, and what you need to have in order to fill up the gaps. The overall idea is plug in the biggest gaps and try not to overload the boats with the sails that not going to see the daylight. I happened to sail on the boats before that we would consider to use more and more sails, but we never would end up using them. So this polar charts, they're very specific to two different boats. One is with overlapping Genoa and another one with a non-overlapping jib, and you can see how the sails correlate to the overall package of the boat and how big of an impact they make. It's quite important to understand that without having one sail inventory, the effective range of given sail can become bigger or smaller. Let's say you don't have a Genoa 2 in your inventory, you only got Genoa 3. This overlap can build up quite a bit bigger. As I said, everything comes out to amount of sails you target to carry on the boat and overall rig package there. You could you can build these charts with ORC. You can do it with us, but in my opinion, it's quite important to have those on the boat to understand in what wind ranges it's effective to use a given sail. And obviously all of this is computer science and a lot of testing done behind it to give you as much as possible accurate data for using it, but going out there with a given sail and trying the range and see what works best, that's in my opinion the way to do it, especially in these points where it's absolutely crossed over. You can see this crossover point with a J2, J1 and a jib top just doing equally as good of a job, but to tell you the truth, having a hard time to believe that that's the case, because it's all tied up to the given wind conditions and sea state and weight of the crew you have and trimming settings. So it's a pretty good analyzing a tool to analyze what you need and figure out your path forward. Stuart, do you have anything add to this?
Yeah, I would say, like, I mean, I think, it's interesting because I didn't actually even notice on the sail chart earlier when we were putting these slides together, but it was something that I relayed, is that, like, on this boat, you got the number one Genoa, you got the number two Genoa, and then there's actually a line on these ones on the J121 for where you would put the reefs in as well, right? In addition, in the reefs in the mainsail, in addition to the head sails, right? So you could say, okay, well, on this boat, they're theoretically reefing the mainsail halfway through the number two range. So, if you were going to try and compensate or not carry that sail, that might be, something that you move or consider, right? I would say, the one on the right, that comes out of Expedition. Anybody who has Expedition for software, you can generate that style of sail chart in there pretty easily. You basically just start with a table and you start plugging in numbers, and then it gives you it, and then it will live. It's basically a floating indicator when you're using that shows you where you should be essentially in the sail chart at any given time. And you can say, well, it makes it really fast to update it, because if you do know what's going on and you're sailing along and you're saying, it says you should be in the J3 and you're in the J4 and you're like, there's no way we can put up a bigger sail right now, then it's a really clear indication that you need to adjust your sail chart. And that could mean that you make a better decision, the next time. And the other thing that I was going to say is that, you don't have to, you can also do a really simple version of these, which are literally just a table, which are just, upwind, downwind. You literally just fire in some numbers and which sail, and you're kind of updating that as you go along. I'd say one advantage to keeping one of these more graphical ones and some sort of table or like spreadsheet, about your sail inventory as well, is that, the one thing that these don't give you is they don't give you a way to annotate them with, like, move the car, or, J2 goes outside of the shrouds, or like, J15, only works with the inhauler, or, you know, whatever, right? There's lots of things that we all know about our boats that, can be hard to communicate or remember at 3 a.m. when you're, just been woken up, told that, you're going to make a sail change, right? So I think there's still value in having a kind of more table style, written sail chart that has some of those additional notes on it. And because they can even do things like, it can tell you what color the bag is, too, right? So that, anybody on the boat can be more helpful in that process, right? because we've all done that race where, we've got one or maybe two really good bow people and we're waking them up every 15 minutes. But and eventually that comes at a point where they just, they're going to start making mistakes if you keep waking them up all the time. So if you can help them get 90% of the way there and make their job easier, that's gonna, net teamwork be better, right? So
Perfect. And next up is repairs and maintenance, which is quite important part if you already got your inventory in place and you just finish up your season, you're done with around the county, and probably the next race you will be doing is the Southern Straits. So it's a perfect time to look over your sails and target the areas where work needed, and we're more than happy to help with this. Visit Loft early during the Christmas time, Christmas time, New Year's, January, February. It's a great time to swing by the Loft to say hi to us, and maybe schedule time in advance so we have a loft floor open. We'll just leave the sails on the floor for you, have a look over with you. Unless you already done it yourself, we can target the areas, make a list of works that needed to happen, and get you sorted by your first race. And you obviously don't want to do it right before the Van Isle. Make sure to have a decent repair kit with some sticky back Dacron, some Cuban fiber, and if it's 3DI sails, it's worthwhile to have a 3DI special repair kit where it comes with two component glue, and it's somewhat a special procedure in terms of repairing it if you put a tear in it. Make sure to have a decent set of needles and a thread, not the needles that were probably hanging in the bottom of the bilge and all rusty and going to be breaking. Make sure it's all in a dry bag and ready to go. And obviously you want to have a palm so you can sew through the sail if needed, and be ready for repairs during the event. And we're always will be within your reach. You can reach out to us and courier the sail to us, and it probably will be closer to the Stuart Slough sales. The guys are on the island, and they'll take care of you. Stuart, you can probably speak on that a little bit more since all of the sales will be going to you.
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I don't know yet which of us is going to be actually sailing on the race, but we're not able to take a full van around this time. So Jeff has promised us that we're going to be able to stash some repair materials of our own inside the van, but that's going to be limited because they got all kinds of stuff they got to fit in there. So but for major repairs and kites, like we'll do our best to do overnight repairs, etc. I would say, I'm going to try and put a list together and give it to Jeff of a couple good ways to get things to us. But there's a couple decent couriers on the island that can kind of get things turned around relatively quickly. I mean, if you tear a kite in half, it's unlikely that we're going to get it, from Campbell River to the loft back to you to start that leg. But there's a solid chance we might get it to you to meet you at the next leg. So we're definitely gonna, if you break something on the race course and you think it's serious and it's got to get to a loft, have someone start calling us or texting us from the boat right away, and we'll start working on it and figuring out, doing everything we can to support you logistically through that process. So yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I did it in 2019, one of the TB52s had torn their kite coming around the top of the island. It went back to the loft in the plane that I flew into from Port Hardy, and then got picked up by a courier and went to the loft, and then was sent out to Yakulit and met them for the next leg. So those things can happen. They take some planning, and definitely don't blow the kite up. Hope that get in, clean up the boat, fall asleep, wake up, drink a couple of beer, and then go, oh yeah, we need to get this sail to a loft, because those moments are going to be critical, right? It's not that necessarily it's going to get picked up the second you hit the dock, but the more that we can do in advance planning to support you logistically, the better chance we have of succeeding. So.
Perfect. And
I would say also too that a lot of this is a good segue anyways, because a lot of batten hardware, batten boxes, etc. A lot of that stuff is metric fasteners and bits and pieces, and you will not find stainless or any metric fasteners, even in Canada. I know because we're metric in most of the hardware stores. So having spares of that stuff is pretty critical, because like little tiny parts can be pretty disabling in the batten systems specifically. As they've gotten better and they're more functional, but they're also more dependent on little pieces that can and break and be lost, and then that's a challenge.
agreed. And here is we put a quick checklist for you guys. So if you are having to bend your sails off, or maybe you're just about to end your season, maybe have a quick checklist and check over the bolt ropes, sail slides, all the batten systems, reinforcement patches, and chafe spots. And if you also, your sail is a little bit old and it may need some quick nip and tuck adjust of the luff curve, or the hollow, the leech needs to be redone. Take some pictures, maybe ask us to go for a sail with you. We can have a look and figure out how to make it better so you're all set for the Van Isle, especially for the mainsails. It's definitely would be a way to do it. The same list we have for the head sails. Probably most common ways where we have failures on the sails is the luff tapes, spreader and extension patches, leech and the foot lines. When you're somewhere on a reach over the northern end of the island and you're reaching and this leech is just flopping like a helicopter, it's a cleat blowing up, like, yeah, that was the time to do it in the winter time, to change that and make sure you can control the tension efficient. And batten systems in the sails if it applies to your situation. The Spinnakers, check over the loose stitching anywhere, inflate the kite, maybe find the field, grab your friend or a crew member and try to look over the kite, find all those little pinholes that sometimes escalating from being really, really small to escalating to being a really big problem, and adjust the luff and leech lines if needed. Talk to us about easing the tapes. Sometimes it's needed to happen after using a kite for a little while, and if you have zippers, sheet catchers or other features, this should be checked. And have a spare zipper cards, that would be good. I'm talking about the sleeves and zip it. We refer to zip it, luffs and tacks. Make sure that those are operating, and maybe bring some spare zippers, because some bow guys, they just do a sail change, they go off watch, all of a sudden the zipper is in their pocket. You're doing a sail change and you need to prepare the kite for the next hoist, and all of a sudden the only zipper car on the boat is in someone else's pocket and you don't know where it is. So having spares is really nice and convenient. And we also prepared some pictures here for you guys with spots that require attention, such as high chafe spots here in the mainsail. It's the spreader patch. You can see how much abuse it takes, and having the patch there is definitely a huge help, since you don't want to poke that hole in the mainsail. The batten pockets, they also get quite a bit of wear and tear on it every time you jibe or tack, and your mainsail got a race roach, it's most likely going to hit that backstay. So checking the spots and making sure the stitching is not coming undone, quite crucial. Here is a good example of a batten being leaned over on a shroud while the boat was sailing downwind. Unfortunately, sometimes they chafe through, and in some instances even battens break. So find those spots and target it beforehand. It's quite important. You may do it while you're doing your reef practicing. You can go out there practicing your reefing, and at the same time, you can go up the rig or do it from the deck level. Mark those areas, and you can put patches on, or you can bring it to us and we'll do it for you. Here is some examples of sails coming undone. This is a sail slide right below the reef point. It was a bit of a reefing mistake, I believe, when leech line was tensioned right before the luff was tensioned, so that's caused this issue here. Bolt ropes, check the bolt ropes, especially near the batten pockets when you have some compression and the batten is just pushing straight into the mast and you're sailing downwind and jibing multiple times. So this can be a bit of a weak spot here. Battens. The battens were broke during the races, and it's still worthwhile if you have your sails just bricked maybe before you heading in the next season, pull them out, check them, making sure that they're not shattered, and if there is any damage, reach out to us. We'll find the right stiffness for you and correct lengths, so you're all sorted. Also, having a few spare battens on the boat for the race itself would be quite beneficial, because it would be hard to find the battens once you are out there. Maybe give it to your shore crew. I know that sometimes people keep a few spare battens right on the boat.
Yeah, just on the subject of battens too. Carbon battens are great. There's a lot of advantages to them. They are more prone to breaking, especially full ones. So if you're going to have a windy downwind leg, especially, having fiberglass battens to swap in is sometimes a worthwhile thing to have. Another thing that happens when carbon battens break is they tend to do a lot of damage they have the potential to do a lot of damage to the sail when they break. So another thing that, a lot of offshore guys will do, or, if you're going to experience a lot of flogging or heavier jibing, is to get heat shrink tubing and put it over the batten. Um, and so it won't stop the batten breaking, but it will mean that when the batten breaks, it contains the damage a bit more, and often can reduce quite a bit of damage to the sail. So that's a good one.
Yeah, we're also using some insignia tapes sometimes on both of the smaller sides, because also once carbon button breaks, it's pretty hard to remove it from the pocket. So that's a good trick there, Stuart. Here is an example of a pinhole you may find in your kite. So it's pretty small, and you can see it's very, very hard to notice, but at times when you don't find them, it can become something bigger. I
And
guess
that's also that also goes into checking the boat for sharps, right? I mean, we kind of all been told that a bunch of times, but a lot of that can be prevented for um, split rings or whatever on bow pulpits, etc. Just making sure that those are taped clean, etc., or your kite's biggest friend.
right. And I guess we went through all the slides here, Stuart. I guess we can, I guess took a bit longer than we anticipated, but we can jump in a Q&A here if if we have any questions. If you guys have questions, feel free to ask right now. If you don't, then feel free to reach out directly to us, and we would be happy to help you. Maybe wait a few minutes for questions here.
Apparently, everyone's very well informed at this point. I think one thing that I actually forgot to mention when we were talking about head sails is we didn't actually really discuss drifters or wind seeker type sails at all either, which is something that is part of my thinking when you're thinking about building that slightly heavier J15 sail versus the really like J1 sail. Having something like a wind seeker or a drifter can be a cheap bit of insurance to keep the boat moving in that like 0 to 4 condition. And it can be a pretty simple, inexpensive sail that's just set, free flying kind of behind the headstay or whatever, to get the boat going, right? Some boats will use their Spinnaker staysail for that job, but a lot of times that sail is a little bit small to really get the boat moving well.
No, absolutely. Like a wind seeker, it's definitely a secret weapon at the Pacific Northwest when you go to those super glassy conditions. And surprisingly, the gains you can make in the downrange is quite amazing once you start going and that apparent is start building. You can put quite a few miles on your competition. So, well built and well thought through drifter can set you up for success. And sometimes it can be dual purpose sail where it also can act as a staysail on your downwind legs. All right, I guess we
Yeah, a
got
couple
it
of
all
questions
covered.
in the chat.
All right.
So best way to contact either of us. I believe there should be contact information in the link that was initially set out, but you'll also be getting a copy of this presentation emailed to you automatically if you registered, which was another question. And so you can early on in the presentation, you can find our contact info. Also, just Google either the lofts, they come right up on search, and we can pass you along. With regards to the North Sails website and where you find drifters for your boat, there's not a lot of information on there about that. But again, feel free to reach out to us and discuss it, and we're happy to, produce a quote or an estimate, or just an even idea of what might be the best way to configure that, or go about that for your boat. I think that was it for the questions from the chat. Yeah. Great. Well,
All right. Thank you so much for joining, guys. And as Stuart said, you're gonna get a copy of this presentation in the next few days. And looking forward to see everyone at the start of the Van Isle next year.
yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you so much. And thanks for Jeff for doing it again.
Yes. Thank you all. Thanks, guys.